Then, the main speakers will get another opportunity to put their views to you. They will have 4 minutes combined, so the opposition side will have 4 minutes, the proposition 4 minutes, to split between them as they will. One speaker can take all 4 minutes, or they can split it into 2 minutes each. No points of information will be allowed during this section, so the speakers can come up on a roll, speak fully, and leave you with their voices ringing in your ears before we take the final vote of the evening. Before we have a final vote, we have to have an initial vote. We have to know where we stand at the beginning. Maybe everyone comes in this room with the view that they definitely shouldn't be allowed to strike, or maybe everyone here thinks that they definitely should. We need to know our starting point so we can gauge how you've been persuaded by the debate. So if I can get my people to count the numbers down here at the front, then I would like to take a vote. Again, there are 3 positions you can vote in. You can be proposition here. You can be saying that vital public services, such as NHS, army, police, should not be allowed to go on strike, or you can take the position that they should be allowed to go on strike. So, who here wants to vote in proposition to this motion? Who believes that vital public services should not be allowed to go on strike? Excellent, excellent. Gosh, my voice is going away with me. But it looks like we've got that vote down, so now I'm going to go to the opposition side. Who here thinks that vital public services must be allowed to go on strike? Vital public services should be allowed to go on strike. Got the countdown there too. So the third position you can take if you're uncertain, if you place yourself somewhere on the fence between these final positions, abstention. Who abstains on the motion? This House believes that vital public services should not be allowed to go through. Excellent. It looks like we've got all the numbers down for all of the positions. We have our starting point. We know what the room is like. And now I would like to introduce all the speakers as one. So I'd like to have applause after I do each of their biographies, explaining who they are and why they've come to you tonight. But first, a round of applause for all of them as a whole, our speakers tonight. First in proposition is John Stanley. John is a member of the Royal College of Surgeons since 2009 and a medic since 2005. He identifies himself on the libertarian right, and he opposes the domination of the medical profession by the state. Please welcome him here tonight. He's going through each of them. Speaking first in opposition is Sean Wallace. Sean is a member of the National Executive Committee of University and College Union, which represents over 110,000 higher education workers, including academics, lecturers, and researchers. UCU is recognised by higher and further education authorities at a national level for the purposes of negotiating salaries, pay structures, and conditions of employment. Sean is also the current joint vice president of the local UCL branch of the union, which specifically concerns UCL staff. There's a large trade union branch with over 1,600 members. Sean is concerned about the government's attempts to dismantle higher education through cuts and increasing tuition fees. He sees standing up for the pay and working conditions of staff as vital in defending the higher education system as a whole. Please welcome him tonight. Speaking second in proposition of this motion is Bailey Reid. Bailey has been an active competitive debater at King's College London for several years and has broken at many competitions, including the World University Debating Championships and the Inner Temple University. He's done work inside the Crown Prosecution Service, giving him personal experience of public services, and is one of the few university students happy to call himself conservative, and has represented the KCL Conservative Society in show debates in the past. He He also realises that saying he is from King's is unlikely to help him in a room full of UCL students. Please welcome him here tonight. And speaking second, in opposition to Tim Yates. Tim is a neurology registrar training in North London and the British Medical Association's regional organiser for junior doctors in North London. Tim has been heavily involved in and is a supporter of the recent strike action taken by junior doctors. Please welcome him here tonight. I think our speakers tonight look like an excellent round. I'm hoping that we all learn a lot from them. I just have two things to note before I allow the first one to speak. One, please don't record any of the speakers we have here tonight. We ourselves live stream the debate, but we can only do that with the active consent of all the speakers who are here. So if you have a mobile phone yourself, please don't record. Only do it if you have asked the speaker specifically in this instance. Number two, you may also engage with the debate in a third way. You can, as I've said, give a point of information during any of the main speeches. You can give a floor speech yourself, put up something during those main speeches for others. Or you can, as you see on the screen, tweet with the hashtag UCLU debating, and that will show up if you search UCLU debating on your phone, and the highlights will show up on that screen up there to give everyone who doesn't necessarily want to speak a way to nonetheless be involved. So, one last round of applause to all our main speakers. And with no further ado, I welcome John Stanley, the first speaker from Proposition to open the debate on the motion, this House believes that vital public services should not be allowed to go on strike.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, can everyone hear me? Right, okay. So I'm not only a doctor tonight, I'm also a patient. I'm recovering from a sore throat. If I sound ever so slightly like Peter Hitchens after a bad night out, I'm very sorry. If I sound like Johnny Vegas at all, I can't apologise for that. I am from St Helens. That is how I normally sound. Thank you for coming here tonight to hear a debate in public about services which we depend on to survive. That's why they're called vital public services. We're in a small minority in the world in this country, not because the state has a complete control over the provision of these services, but because we live in a democracy where the views of the public, without the specialist training of doctors or the statecraft of politicians, really do matter. In choosing to keep the state as a monopsony, that is the sole purchaser of vital public services, the state's now bound by the public to deliver them. In having this state monopsony, you'll hear that word a lot.
Yeah, that's just 1 minute in.
That's just 1 minute, okay. I'll carry on talking until I'm interrupted. Fine. So because we also have this monopsony on doctor training and provision, there's no credible replacement if doctors go on strike. There's no competition from them later on as consultants, certainly not from this country. The strike that happened earlier this month was holding to hostage the state by a special interest group, employable only by the state. That this strike was mutinous.
On that point,
well, yeah, sure.
So if doctors have no alternative pathways to pursue their career, is it not more important they are able to say in the way that their jobs are wrong?
Absolutely, but not by striking, and that's why I'm going to carry on explaining. But not, you're absolutely right, but not by striking. Okay. That this strike was mutinous was not in question. The question is, should mutiny against the state be legal? And I certainly don't think it should be. There are three main points that I want to have a little talk to you about. The first was that this strike action was used primarily to accelerate discussion between the BMA and the government, to maximise public awareness and to minimise public scrutiny by placing an extreme urgency on these negotiations being completed, when in fact this was not necessary. There's also a lot of research out there, dating back to the 1950s in some cases, that the Department of Health's own stance in the way it treated junior doctors initially and the terms that it offered actually predisposed the BMA to consider strike action. It treated the doctors as one homogenous group. It got rid of pay progression completely and tried to characterise doctors as one group that should only be offered one pay formula. This was a mistake. and it led to the BMA being much more able to offer the opportunity of strike action, and that strike action being supported. Finally, and this is very important for me personally, we live in a world where democracy is increasingly under threat from all parts of the world. For that reason, it's very important that for as long as we have a democratic component to our public services, that is, the state provides them, that democracy has to be strong. It cannot be held to special interest groups. Any direct action that is not carried out through our... You want to speak, yeah?
What's your comparative? What are the alternatives to striking?
Yeah, we'll come on to that in a second. I'm very happy to discuss those afterwards, but I will finish this. So, as I said, for as long as the state wishes to remain part of our public services and indeed dominate them, it's important that politicians are the ones held to account. Anyone that wishes to take direct action that doesn't involve political debate is effectively short-circuiting that debate. I'm happy to give, if I've got any more time on. Okay, so one of the advantages about banning strikes in public services is that actually puts the responsibility for the breakdown of pay disputes and contract negotiations solely on the state. It means that the BMA and other unions actually have different recourses to action without striking. A major issue in the current contract dispute is about safeguarding of unsafe hours, that is to say, they're working too many hours. There is industrial action called work to rule. You don't have to do that for a day, you can work to rule for a month. You start at 9 o'clock, you finish at 4 o'clock, you go home on the dot. You can do that through work to rule. That is a perfectly legal and legitimate form of industrial action. It has been used by others before. Secondly, we're a parliamentary democracy. We've had 2 debates on whether or not we bomb certain bits of Syria. We've had a parliamentary debate on whether or not we should let Donald Trump through the door. I've yet to see a Labour MP table a full parliamentary debate to discuss the terms and conditions of the junior doctors' contract. I think it's perfectly reasonable that they are discussed in Parliament electively, so that the general public as a whole can get both sides of the story without being pressed into action by certain unnecessary urgencies like strike action being precipitated. Yeah.
Can I? Yes, I can. Thank John Stanley for that excellent speech in proposition of this motion. I'd now like to invite the first opposition speaker, Sean Wallace, to respond to that speech. Please welcome him here.
Okay, thanks everybody. What I want to do is I want to leave you with 4 thoughts. The first thought is that the right to strike is a fundamental human right. That is, I'm going to go further than simply defending the right to strike in essential services. I'm going to point out that when people sell their labour to an employer, wherever that employer is, your ability to withdraw your labour, your ability is critical to being able to say no to unsafe conditions in the workplace, or being asked to do something that you believe is unethical or unacceptable. And that's obviously important in the case of junior doctors, being able to say no to carrying out treatment, or nurses speaking out, whistleblowing about the treatment of patients in, for example, in Staffordshire. When we talk about banning the right to strike, actually what we have to start from is the fact that RCN, that's the Royal College of Nurses, did not take strike action, and has not taken strike action for most of its existence. The BMA is not a strike-happy organisation. So when we look at the state of the NHS, blaming the situation of the current situation of the NHS on doctors being forced and compelled into taking strike action is looking down the telescope the wrong way. To understand why the NHS is in the state it is in, you have to look at the action of the employers. So when people say we have to take things into Parliament or we should look at alternatives to strike action, you have to ask yourself, do you trust the employers, the people who run the NHS, the NHS trust boards and the various formulations of those people to run the NHS in a safe way? And the Health and Safety Executive have answered that question. The HSE is a government body. They have launched a prosecution of the board of the Mid Staffordshire Hospital. for 4 deaths over a period of time in which there are potentially hundreds of deaths that may have been attributed to some degree or less or other to the running down of terms and conditions in mid-staffs. The fact that people didn't take strike action has actually put the public at risk. When we talk about strike action in other public services, look at the FBU, the Fire Brigades Union. That's on the list that the government wants to require to be defined as an essential public service. That's a vital public service. No question.
So what happens if there's a fire and no one strikes?
Right, that's a good question. What happens? This is the problem. This is a problem for anybody whose job it is to carry out vital public service. Because the alternative to taking strike action, not taking strike action, is to lose the fire engines, to lose the ability to respond to fires, and more deaths. And we know this. The HS, you can go through to public sector, public service, whether you call them public services, or private services, like the trains, you can see that when strikes are banned, or when strikes are limited, that you see safety go down. And the problem is, it's safety not just for people who are at work, but for people who use those services. Finally, the argument, I have to go back to this question, the argument that says that strikes should be banned is to say there's an alternative. It was suggested there's an alternative by debates in Parliament. I don't think that's actually answering the question. The question is, what do the staff who do the job, who know what happens on the job, say and think about the terms and conditions in which they do that job? Politicians don't know what it's like on the wards. The workers who do the job do. And it's for them to make the decision of whether to go on strike. And they have to win a ballot. They have to ballot to take strike action. You don't have to ballot to close a hospital. There are not ballots of the public when the NHS is cut. They're simply, these decisions are made and services are handed over to private companies, and there is no ballot. So when people talk about the alternative to strike action, let's be clear about it. The alternative is more cuts and no opposition. The prison officers are another vital public service, and they don't have the right to strike. They currently do not have the right to strike. They are banned from taking the right to strike. They have taken strike action, even though the prisons are supposed to be outside the right to strike. And that's because people who do a job, who are organised, realise at some point you have to draw a line and have to say that something is unsafe. None of these people do this for fun. But nobody's been prosecuted in the POA to go on strike, despite the fact it's unlawful. And the reason is because it's an unworkable law. Because what you're talking about is opposing the public will. I find it ironic that a libertarian is in favour of imposing state control over the public will. That's my case.
Thank you, Sean. What's that? Excellent. So you have to wait until your solo speech, or you can offer a point information to the other side. Sure. But thank you a great deal for being a full round of applause there for the first opposition speaker, Sean Wallace. Now I'd like to invite up the second proposition speaker, Mr. Bailey Reid. Please welcome him here.
I will be telling you why people who work in public services not only should never go on strike, but also have a principal obligation to the state that means that they don't actually have the right to go on strike because of the considerable harms that accrue at the point at which they strike. This takes place in a world where we've seen things like the winter of discontent, where bodies piled up being unburied because the people went on strike and refused to bury them, because rubbish piled the streets, because no one collected the rubbish. This is what happens when you let vital public services go on strike. We think this is abhorrent. We very proud stand against it. This debate clearly takes place in a world like our own, like the UK, where there is certain things that stop you from having horrendous conditions within the workplace. It can never get that bad because there are laws that protect these people when they're in the workplace. Therefore, we think the current laws that stay in place that protect the rights of these people are sufficient. If it is insufficient, we are happy, no thank you, for debates taking place in Parliament, like my partner said, in order to recorrect these. 2 points of rebuttal before I jump into substantive. So he said that it is human right to withdraw your labour. And I agree, it is a human right to withdraw your labour. However, what is not a human right is for you to withdraw your labour in such a way that prevents anyone else from replacing you. I am fine with you leaving your occupation. I am fine with you going to other sectors. What I'm not fine is striking, because striking due to the law prevents anyone else from taking your job. Secondly, it also means that sort of people, when they go on strike, stand outside the hospitals and prevent patients from getting in. It stops the nurses, it stops doctors from getting into these places. The same with train services, the same with all other forms of strikes. He then tells us that Parliament don't know about what it's like to be within these hospitals. This is untrue for the very simple fact that there are lords who have been promoted by being the heads of these sort of industries. The heads of hospitals do get places in the House of Lords. Secondly, you get institutions like the civil service, who spent, no thank you, months researching what it's like within these places, but you know what, the civil service aren't biased and aren't always going to be in favour of it, but take a more nuanced opinion and to research all the things on both sides. We think here on side proposition that is, simply put, Western hypocrisy for these sorts of people to go, I am mildly unsatisfied with my work conditions, therefore I'm going to go on strike. These are people who put on shoes that were made by slave labor in Taiwan, who then go and take their phone out, which was manufactured in China, that requires suicide nets, that then goes in his car that was made from mechanization that cost millions of jobs across the world. That drives oil that's mined through dirt labor in Saudi Arabia. We think it's simply hypocritical for him to then go, oh, I am mildly displeased with my work conditions and therefore I'm going to go and strike. He doesn't have that much to complain about. But what does happen when he complains? It affects the most desperate of society within the United Kingdom. Because you know what? Most people within this room are able to afford university education and live in London. We're all fairly well off in comparison to the sorts of people affected by this. The sort of people affected by it are the people who are desperate and rely on these sort of state services in order to survive. They're the sorts of people who have their mother terminal illness within hospitals and require these sorts of people in order to survive. If these people are hit hard the most, as my honourable gentleman pointed out a point of information, it is the fire brigade and the person's house that burns down. However, the most well-off in society are able to afford the private comparative. Note that the free market still exists to a degree. Note that even though it is that the state provides most of it, if it truly got that bad and they really didn't like these conditions they were working in, they could simply move towards currently a fairly small private sector of Bupa and the like, and which would therefore expand at the point at which they are able to offer better conditions for these people. Secondly, they are able to move to foreign markets. Therefore, the NHS does have to be competitive, and it does have to compete with other services in order to be high quality, in order to make sure that the conditions aren't that bad, otherwise they lose all their workers. So why do you have a moral duty to do this? There are certain jobs in the world that require you losing a certain degree of your bodily autonomy. There are certain jobs that when you go in, you accept that the consequences of you not doing your job are so devastating to the world that you cannot fail in your job. This is why when you join the army, you have to sign to the tour of duty and you cannot leave, otherwise you will go to prison. Because a soldier who deserts the field of battle puts not only the lives of our country at risk, but the lives of everyone in his brigade, the lives of the people he has been entrusted. We think this is equally comparable to the sort of vital public services that we are banning from going on strike. Because at the point at which you go on strike, there are many people's lives are at risk and whose livelihoods will be at risk. And note that you do know that you can't go on strike at the point of this. Therefore, you have consented into not being able to go on strike because this wasn't a quick thing we just jumped on you. You know it before you enter the market. Also, that you can still leave that profession, we're just not going to let you go on strike. And the second part of why you have it, because there are certain reciprocal duties that you owe to the state because of how much the state has done for you. The more someone does to you, and in order to help you, the more you owe it in return. Note that company owes relatively little amounts to its individual employees, and that's why we're relatively fine with big companies going on strike, because in those relationships, firstly, there are massive consequences for us as a society. But secondly, note that the sort of reciprocal relationships are very small. I give my labour to him, he gives money to me, and that's about all that happens. They don't have mass pensions, they don't provide my education, they don't provide my welfare, they don't ensure that everyone has food on their table and has a shelter over their life. The difference is the state does. The state does provide all of those things, and therefore I owe the obligation to the state for providing so much to my life that means I should not ever put the state in a position where the state might fail. I can never put the state in a position where it can't fundamentally provide the services that I took from the state, because if teachers go on strike, they're all educated by the state, but now they're preventing others from benefiting what they got out of the state. Therefore, we think it is abhorrent for people to go on strike and work for the private sector, because the state has given so much to them that the point at which they are now crippling the state, they're preventing anyone else from benefiting in the same way that they were able to benefit. Therefore, you owe these massive duties to the state and should never be allowed to go on strike. For these reasons, we are very happy to stop vital public services from going on strike.
Thank you to David for the second speech in proposition coalition. Now I would like to invite our final main speaker of the night. I would like to invite Mr. Tim Yates to please offer the second opposition speech. Welcome in here to the floor.
Mr. I haven't been a minister for a few years, but my colleague down there who's a surgeon is a minister, of course, and surgeons and physicians think differently. And I'm gonna be clear about that. I mean, that was very black and white, what we just heard. I think I just need to be a bit more subtle and actually explain. It's a bit more complicated. And I'm going to deal mainly with healthcare workers, as you'd expect. But a lot of this reads right across to essential public services of all types. So strike action by doctors and healthcare workers always precipitates ethical debates, sure. Those who see strike action as unethical often cite arguments like this. Doctors cannot strike because in doing so they're holding the sick to ransom for material gain, and as opposed to adhere to a professional code of conduct that prohibits them from striking. And doctors don't deny that there's something in that. And in our Hippocratic tradition, there is a presumption against any kind of any action that results in preventable harm to human beings. And, you know, one end of the spectrum, that's me going home on time, which I never do. And at the other end of the spectrum, that's complete withdrawal of labour, which we never do. But I have to say also, there are a few alternatives to strikes. I mean, we talked about working to rule. That's actually not a good suggestion. Actually, that doesn't work for doctors because of the duty of care. I'm sure John will confirm that for us later. That said, the right of healthcare workers to strike is important. To deny them the right to withdraw their labour would infringe, in my view, too comprehensively on their rights. While the state may restrict the rights of citizens in certain instances, it is generally obligated to maintain their rights wherever possible. It is always going to be better for the common good of society to preserve the rights of healthcare workers to strike, even if subject to some restrictions, rather than remove that right completely. So I'm going to argue that strike action by doctors that seems unethical can be fully justified if 6 criteria are met. These criteria uphold the moral presumption against health workers going on strike, but also recognise that special circumstances may arise which justify a strike. These are just cause, proportionality, reasonable hope of success, last resort, legitimate authority, and formal declaration. So the first of these is just cause and right intention. I'm sure you agree with me that doctors may go on strike only for a just cause backed by right intention. Strike action may not, for instance, be initiated purely for self-enrichment, and we would never do that. In the healthcare context, a just cause is one that seeks to secure and preserve the conditions necessary for the health of the population. It's as simple as that. It doesn't exclude disputes about wages, but those constitute a just cause only if the wages of the doctors can be shown to be so poor as to constitute a public health risk. The case of Malta is a good example, where poor wages and long working hours meant that many of the graduates left the country. Those working in the medical school also left the country. The Maltese medical degree was de-recognised internationally, and the healthcare system there was on the point of collapse. A strike there was an act to defend public health by preventing further collapse of the system. The second is proportionality. And of course, we need to bear in mind as doctors and healthcare workers that the sick and the infirm are dependent on us. and we should not inflict disproportionate harm on anybody. This suggests that doctors on strike should continue to provide at least critical services like emergency care. And one can draw on loose definitions of harm versus hurt when deciding on proportionality, with hurt encompassing patient inconvenience and frustration, which will generally be more acceptable. John, most of what I do is not life and death. It may be in your area. So I can strike with my morals intact. 3, reasonable hope of success. This is difficult, but it ensures the public's health is not compromised for a futile cause. I can give you an example of that, but I'm going to skip over that to save time. But by and large, it's another way of saying that socio-economic context is really important, and a blanket yes or no to strike action is rarely justifiable. 4th, it must be a last resort. You know, the BMA has been locked in negotiations with the employers for 3 years, and every opportunity to break that deadlock has failed. This is our last throw of the dice. And so the criterion is met, in my view, if conflict between worker and employer persists, despite all reasonable efforts, including negotiation, mediation, dissent and disobedience. 5, legitimate authority. A decision to take action must be made by a body like a union, which places the participation of relevant workers in decision-making at the heart of the matter. The central issue is whether or not the decision to take strike action represents the collective view of the majority, and if met, that suggests that the cause of the strike action is just as a reasonable hope of success and the condition of last resort has been fulfilled. Those decisions are then legitimate in the sense that there's wide agreement that strike action is only being used where absolutely necessary, and it prevents a few militants going on strike and causing harm illegitimately. And 6, and finally, formal declaration. Before engaging in strike action, the legitimate authority of the union needs to make a formal public declaration so planning can be done to protect those that may come to harm. So those are the 6 criteria. I cannot deny that there should be a higher bar to clear where health workers like myself and John feel they need to take strike action. But if we as a society allow those who care for our sick, like me and John, to abandon our Hippocratic oaths and our duties any more readily than this, then we all abandon our sick, and that's unacceptable. But my criteria show that it's possible to balance that, the high standards that we have, with the needs of society, and even take account of the ideology of those who seek a complete prohibition on that. What's more, they are not hypothetical constructs, but practical ones. These are the arguments that we as a profession went through in greenlighting the current action, which finds itself with increasing levels of public support. Just cause, hours changes impacting on patient safety, widening of the gender pay gap, a worsening recruitment crisis. Proportionality, emergency care still provided. Last resort, 3 years of negotiations reaching an impasse where there genuinely was going to be an urgent imposition of a contract. Legitimate authority. More than 50% of all the junior doctors in England voted in favour of strike action. Formal declaration, notice was given to the NHS in excess of that required, and no patients came to harm. And chance of success, only time will answer, but we stand together in solidarity as a profession with the public supporting us. And with these arguments in mind, you must vote this motion down. Thank you.
I would like to thank Dr. Tim Yates, thank you for the correction, and all the main speakers for some excellent main speeches tonight. Now, as I said, before we get to the summary of speeches, where the main speakers get to speak again, we have the section of the floor speeches. You can make a 3-minute speech or less if you don't think you have 3 minutes in you, on either proposition or opposition or abstention. And you have the opportunity to win a box of lovely mint chocolates or a bottle of port, as the desire takes you, whether you are deeply alcoholic or not. It's always very fun to give a floor speech, and it's even more fun to win. So I'm going to ask for someone who would like to give a proposition floor speech. The first proposition floor speech. Someone who wants to come down and say that vital public services should not be allowed to strike. Any hands up there? Anyone who wants to give a proposition floor speech? Doesn't have to be 3 minutes, it can be a very short statement. Looks like we have a hand over there. Please come down. next round, you can win a bottle, you can win a box of chocolates. It's a great thing to do. So, and now I'm going to ask for a floor speech in opposition to the motion. I want someone to take a floor speech saying that vital public services should be allowed to strike. I have 2 hands. Someone looks scarily enthusiastic. In the pink shirt, please come down.
Yes, you can.
Smooth.
Two things in the speech. One, lies that Bailey said, and two, in general, why light strikes are necessary as a last resort for public services and why that does it as better public services. So firstly, Bailey. So incredibly lot about picketing and stopping patients getting into the hospitals. Like this wasn't a minor strike, right? Like doctors continue to maintain essential public services. They went in where they were needed by the hospital. They absolutely did everything that would need people alive. So nothing bad actually happened there. Second, the civil service being good at making decisions about these kind of things. I noticed that firstly, the civil service only produces objectives reports. It's the politicians that actually make the decisions about what policies are enacted. And as we can see, politicians often make very poor decisions regarding that. Several examples. Firstly, Michael Governor's curriculum, which was literally opposed by the entire union of teachers everywhere in the UK ever. However, was pushed forward for his own ideological reasons. I can only imagine why. Secondly, David Nutt, health advisor to the government, was fired because he did the cardinal sin of using an evidence-based study to try and advise policy. When he said, look, ecstasy is less dangerous than alcohol, they fired him because it did not align with their vision of what policy should be. This shows us that governments will push forward policies that are not ideal, do not work, are not good. Therefore, we need something back. Why is this? Because governments at the moment have ultimate power when it comes to deciding the contracts of doctors, right? The reason that the junior doctor struck was in response not to actually anything in general, but specifically the imposition of a new contract after negotiations broke down. Notice that the negotiations weren't really negotiations. There was details revealed of a meeting where they came in with, I think there's 10 or 15 talking points, and were told that they weren't allowed to discuss one of those talking points. The discussion didn't actually occur in a proper way. So you can see that governments will impose things because in spite of every expert in the field opposing them. Notice one of the people, the government advisors, can be very out of touch. It can be people who have left the service. I believe it was the ex-head of the BMA wrote a letter to the Telegraph criticizing the doctor strike, at which point the widespread medical community, including his own son, wrote in response to say that he was out of touch and did not know what he was talking about. When government uses these kind of things to justify policies that they're pushing forward for ideological reasons, clearly opposed by the people in the industry, people on the ground, we need some kind of last resort. Because when the government has the ability to impose, no, Bailey shut down, you had so much, you had more time after anyway. When the government has the ability to impose, when the government refuses to negotiate, when all the evidence and all the experts in the field oppose them doing a certain policy, yet the government continues to push forward, nothing else will work to stop this from going forward. We think it's legitimate to strike and it's the only thing that will work. All of the proposition team, talking about the duties of these people to do things. I think as a doctor, specifically, but also as a teacher or a policeman, your duty is to execute the service you've done in the best way possible. Notice that most of these people don't strike for personal gain. They wouldn't be in these jobs if they weren't for personal gain. Doctors work horrifying hours, as the teachers, as the police officers. Yeah, they choose to strike against these things because we think that they're choosing to maintain the integrity of their services against unfavourable contracts that will hurt the service they provide. So, yeah, definitely oppose this.
I would like to thank that speaker for an excellent first opposition floor speech there. You may be a contender for our 20 points or our lovely strawberry chocolates. If people who are making the next floor speeches prepare excellent ones, I remind you, they can be 3 minutes, they can be shorter than 3 minutes, they can be proposition, they can be opposition, or they can be what I'm asking for now, an abstention floor speech. So, I want someone who's not necessarily on either side, someone who's not necessarily decided about it, someone who just wants to make a point without picking a try to go with. Looks like I have a few hands, but I'm going to go with the hand which is held highest up there in the check shirt. Please come down.
everybody. My name is Anajo Munikwa, and I'm from Zimbabwe, first-year student doing chemical engineering here at UCL. So I chose to abstain from this motion because initially, first I was actually in opposition. I wasn't really moved by you guys. You did a good job, but it's not the reason why I changed my mind. The reason I'm in abstention is because, as I said, I'm from Zimbabwe. And what happens back home is that some nurses and some doctors have been working for 2 months in the hospitals and not getting paid. Now, I'm thinking as a parent, I have children at home and I want to take them to school, but I also have the ethical dilemma of the people that are in the hospitals that I need to take care of. So they pushed on for 2 months, no pay, $0, £0, 2 months working. Then, of course, you would have to strike. You have to. You don't have a choice because there's people back home that you have to take care of. Now, this motion really, it made me change my mind because we're talking about the UK, not back home. If it was just in general like this, then I would say you have to strike because I'm thinking about the people back home. How are they going to continue working with no pay? You can't do that. You have to bring it to the government. They have to know that they have to get paid. When you stop working, you're thinking about all the patients that you're leaving behind. I saw a question up there that said that were doctors stopping them from entering the building or whatever. But if you let patients enter a building and there's no doctors to cure them, what's the difference from not letting them go in? It's pretty much the same. Here in the UK, you have minimum wage. I'm sure you have minimum wage, right? And then I asked a couple of people up there if the amount of pay that the doctor was getting was reduced at any time, and I heard it wasn't. So that means that, is it true? I'm not sure. Is it true? When the doctors were signing up and getting paid, did they get less?
Some of the things that they were getting less money because they're not being paid for their overtime.
Oh, they're not being paid for their overtime. But then their general time savings.
Point of information on that. So, one thing that hasn't been covered very well in the media is that there are two components to a doctor's salary. There's the basic salary and everything else. The basic salary is what we are pensioned on. So, because the basic salary has been, the initial offer has been 11% rise, that actually leads to a lifetime gain of 11% of the pension. So, it's not quite as straightforward as you think that some pay goes up and some pay goes down. It translates into much higher pension as well.
Right. So in that case, people are signing up contracts, and you already know how much you're going to get paid. Going against that is pretty much mutiny, because when you're signing up and saying, I'm going to work for this captain on this ship, and then you choose not to, isn't that going against something you've already agreed on? Why? So this is just something I wanted to bring up. I'm abstaining because back home, people need to strike. But in the UK, when you're getting more money, you don't really need to.
Thank you for an interesting point raised by a very fine abstention speaker. Now I'm going to go back around to the beginning and take another round of floor speech, I think is of interest. I remind you, you can win a bottle of Fine Small Ports or some of the lovely sort of chocolates. I have tasted both of these products in the past. I can't recommend them enough. So please make a floor speech if you think. Just a reminder as well, don't record the floor speakers unless you've got that person's explicit approval. So I'd like again to take a proposition floor speech. Someone who's willing to say that vital public services should not be allowed to strike. A proposition floor speech. It looks like I have a hand there in another lecture, but this one's blue. Come down.
Though I am speaking in favour of the proposition, I will start by saying that both sides have failed to appreciate the severity of this motion. We are talking about vital public services. So when the second speaker for the opposition says that his service is actually not really life or death, as he said, well, that's not a vital public service, is it, sir? We are talking about doctors for whom you are sat in A&E, possibly with your arm falling off, or you're having a severe asthma attack, whom they do not come for. No, thank you. You're talking about people who dial 999 when the house is burning down, and the fire engine can't come because, as the opposition's point raised, there might be a health and safety problem with the fire engine, or perhaps the fire engine's a year out of date. These are vital public services, life and death scenarios. People signing up to these professions know this, and if they've signed up to the profession, they've presumably agreed to it within, if not their direct contract, then by nature of the fact that they are performing that role, they have agreed to it. So what really matters? Is it the direct or the indirect safety of the profession, or the providence of a life or death scenario? We do not have the luxury to consider here. There are other ways, as the proposition have rightly said, of raising problems here, and very democratic ways of doing so. And I would urge this House to consider the proposition's argument. I'll just take this point.
If they shouldn't strike because they signed up for it, then surely if striking is the only thing that's going to stop fundamental and irreversible damage to their profession, damage to the jobs that they're doing, surely they should do that because that's what they agreed to do. They agreed to sign up to do their jobs, therefore they should continue to do their jobs. They should safeguard their jobs as much as possible.
I think you make a valid point. However, I will counter it, because I think that there are more productive ways of raising the problem. More productive ways than immediately withdrawing your service, your vital service, ways that have been proven to be better, that trade unions are perfectly capable of carrying out. In fact, they're a major public body. There's no reason why they couldn't raise public support by ways other than strike. That's why I'm in favour of the proposition's motion.
I'd like to thank that excellent speaker for that second proposition for speech there. And now, as you all know, I'm going to go to an opposition for speech. I want someone to say that vital public services should be allowed to go on strike. Again, you can win prizes, you can have a great time, you can do an excellent speech, and I choose you to do it. Please come down in the den. I think it might actually not be den. The search fell very flat.
Okay. I guess the topic at hand is actually something that's already quite interestingly divided. Some vital public services are not allowed to strike, not allowed to join the union, and some of them are, but still in most cases still do. Most of the news at the moment would be sort of junior doctors, which is a problem since this is strike action coming directly from the source. So taking away their right to strike now, are we going to incentivise people to take up a career where they have really no right to say how they are paid, how they're going to progress through their life, which is what they signed up for? Obviously, this is something, strike action is something that is often associated with students and being slightly anarchic, and there's a perception of that, but actually I'd like to argue quite the opposite, that being allowed the right to strike action is something like democracy, and is organised by something, by a union, which has certain procedures that has to go through in line before something like this happens. And also this whole patients not being allowed into the hospital, I really doubt that that's ever part of the movement for strike action. I think the distinction needs to be made between stuff that is anarchic and stuff that is actually, between what is part of the strike action and between what is just disruption, which actually is not technically allowed. So overall, I don't believe that we yeah, I don't want people working in public services to become something more of an easy target than what they might already be. And very proud to, sorry, yeah, oppose.
Thank you for that excellent second opposition to your speech then. And now, as before, we'll go to the abstention position. A reminder again, abstention is in the middle, abstention is you don't want to make a party political point, abstention is on the fence. Abstention is uncertain, and it looks like I have one abstention hand, so I would like to take that hand, which I think is for you in the blue shirt, please go down.
Yeah, I'm fine being on camera. Been there quite a few times, unfortunately. So the reason why I'm an abstention is because, well, I think that like vital public services striking is certainly harmful in some cases, and in some cases actually quite frivolous. I mean, talk about Transport for London. I think they're having a strike tomorrow, and that's considering that tube drivers actually get about 49k, which is only slightly less than a newly qualified solicitor in London. Considering that, but nevertheless, I do believe that we should have a right to strike. It's just that this right should be used carefully, right? Considering this like specific case about why doctors are have chosen to strike, it's largely because they do have, I think, quite valid complaints, and those complaints have not been heard. I think we do have to remember that the government is in a quite strong position as bargaining goes, right? It is the government officials who do the so-called negotiating. It is government officials, Jeremy Hunt right now, who is making the deal, and very often doctors themselves don't have very much say regarding this, right? I think when you think about alternatives to strike, well, there's not a lot, right? Because strikes are the thing that really get public attention, right? The idea that someone is stopping a vital public service is what grabs headlines. The kind of negotiation that goes behind the scenes is probably not what we think of very much when we think about, union action or trying to change doctors' conditions, right? So we think in these circumstances, strikes are actually quite effective. They're the kind of thing that actually prompt the government to change things or prompt whoever's in charge to reconsider the matter. So I think a right to strike is something that is very useful and is quite necessary, especially when we talk about public services. They don't often get opportunity to strike. They don't actually very often use this ability to strike as such, except for Transport for London. But nevertheless, they do so because I think they do really need a change, right? For me, essentially, this is a debate about, waiting for something to be done in the long run while there's an increasing risk of something bad happening versus taking action right now at a high risk of something bad happening while the strike is going on, but nevertheless, the chance for something better to happen and, better services in the long run. Very last thing about what Bailey said about people knowing about this when they go into the contracts. Now, I'm not 100% sure about the situation in the UK about junior doctors when they leave a medical school and start a contract, whether they have to work for the NHS. But the situation is right now we see in some places like the US or in Hong Kong, for example, a lot of people don't want to become doctors, and if they do, they don't enter public services. The reason is because they get screwed over in public services. Like the contracts are absolute shit. They have to work long hours. They don't get much pay. They're considered much less. And medical degrees do take a very long time to complete. They take a lot of work. So that's why people don't want to go into becoming a doctor. So is the situation in the long run the possibility that people don't go to vital public services, which therefore puts even a greater strain on these services because no one wants this job. They think this condition is shit, so they won't do it. So, there's something to consider. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that really great second abstention floor speech, and indeed last floor speech of the night. I'm sorry to cut it short. We are getting some really great points and some really excellent exploration of the issue in the way that we always want floor speeches to do. So, now, after these speeches, we move to the summary speeches. The opposition bench will speak first. Both opposition speakers will have 4 minutes between them to make their points. We will bang once at 2 minutes into 4 minutes to indicate if they want to swap, that's the time to do it. And then we'll bang twice at 4 minutes in to indicate that that's the end of their summary time. After that, we'll get the proposition speech, and that will be the end of the debate, and we'll have a proper vote. Just to let everyone know, The Tutti is indeed right. It's not strawberry. I'm ashamed as a liar, they are not chocolate. Now that been very done, no further ado, I invite the opposition summary speakers to summarise their side of the debate for you. Please welcome them here.
Okay, in summary, I want to talk about the fire brigades because that's been the one point at which we've had an actual argument about people's lives being put on the line about somebody taking strike action, and on that day, people may die. That is always the question that firefighters face when they go on strike, because they know that they are trained, equipped, and in a position to rescue people from fires. But we also know that the cuts that have happened in the fire service, 30% in the last year or so, have actually meant that the numbers of fire engines and the distance travelled to rescue people, 365 days a year, have caused deaths. Now you can calculate those deaths, but they are substantially in excess of the deaths that occur on one day of strike action. So if you want to be a moral philosopher and you want to account for this, you can clearly say that striking to prevent closures of fire stations is morally justified and is proportionate. That does not mean that firefighters rushed out the door to take strike action. But let's be clear, that's what the argument is. It's not about a fire engine that's a little bit elderly. Let's be very clear. Our services are being cut. We do face a government that doesn't listen to the public and employers that do try to cut health and safety. And unless you're in a position to walk out the door collectively, democratically, as workers who provide a service, then you are not in a position to arrest that process of decline. And that's true whether you're in Britain or in Zimbabwe or in Greece, where people are working, where strikes have been banned and people are working for zero pay. It's not just Africa, it's parts of Europe where cuts are being made and people are being compelled into that situation. Internationally, wherever you look, the right to democratic rights that are enshrined on the basis of the right to strike.
Almost everything we value in Western democracy is a consequence of the existence of unions ultimately having the right to resort to strike action if necessary. Health, benefits, and our security, good working practices. I agree with one of the colleagues earlier that said something about the vitality of the service or otherwise, but my fundamental point was that I tried to get across my 6 criteria. The more vital a service, the greater the burden on the union and the individuals to justify the action that they're going to take. And I feel that you agreed with that. You're happy to take a fundamental leap of faith to trust these professionals that will come and look after you in your time of need. But at the same time, those that speak against this motion are not willing to trust them to regard strike action against all of their better judgment in their time of need as an absolutely last resort. And I think that reflects poorly on those that seek to portray themselves as believers in the rights of individuals. These people fundamentally are there to look after you and you need to trust them. But I just want to say a couple of points of information about the NHS. It is fully a monopoly. My colleague here has said that we can go off and work in the private sector. That's clearly not the case. As junior doctors, there's only one employer in which we can work, and that's the NHS, and that's fine with me. I'm used to work there. But it's wrong to say we can go off and work in the private sector. And for consultants, their contract stipulates that they have to offer any further time that they have to the NHS first before they offer it to a private provider. We are fundamentally committed to public service. It runs through our veins. And to suggest that we take strike action for anything less than crisis, a last resort, is incorrect. You must support this motion. Sorry, vote down this motion and give your valuable public servants the right to express their problems in the public sphere.
Thank you for those opposition summary speakers there. And now to summarise the proposition side and indeed the debate as a whole, please welcome the last speakers of the night, the proposition summary speakers.
Thank you very much. It's all the second part. Okay, we heard a lot of arguments for and against tonight. The strongest argument for banning strikes was the summary you just heard. The government isn't listening and therefore we have to do something else. Majority Conservative government, that's better than what we had 5 years ago. There must be an awful lot of deaf voters out there if the government isn't listening. That doesn't matter whether you support the Conservative government or not, it is a plurality, not a coalition. The second one I want to make is that we've started out saying that should strikes be banned or not. I'm going to offer you a third option, I'm going to offer you a triangle. We know that the state now has a monopoly or monopoly on providing emergency care. We've learned from Tim now that junior doctors can only work for the NHS, and we live in a democracy. Choose to, because 3 together are not consistent. Otherwise, you're allowing a special interest group to hijack that public service, which is a monopoly by your own English. Okay, you cannot have all 3. You can only have 2 of those 3 points. And finally, I just want to rebut some of the claims made, such as this was an action of last resort this last strike. Walking out of ACAS negotiations to have a strike, to raise your game, to go back into talks, it's not last resort. It's a very effective tactic, it's not last resort. On the point of emergency cover, Tim himself said that different specialties have a different emergency component to their workload. Absolutely. I wish the BMA would have said that before, so that some specialties would have been balloted first, and not others who would have had far less disruption if that would have been the case. And finally, just cause. Well, we would say that, wouldn't we? We're both members of the BMA, actually. We both want better working conditions. We both want better pay. We both want our hours to be respected. We're rather subjective on that. To say you trust us with doctors, not unless it's your medicine, I'm afraid. If you want us to trust us to provide you medical care, it's absolutely fine to trust us as doctors. Otherwise, we are just a special interest group. A very special one, I have to say. I'm sure Tim would agree. But nonetheless, we don't have any more or any less right in democratic society than you do. Thank you.
So one of the main complaints we get out of opposition is that it will cause fundamental irrevocable damage if we don't do this. That they will turn up in 20-year-old fire engines and won't be able to put out the house fire. I'm going to suggest to you that if this was the case, you'd be able to get mass public support to pressure the government to get legal changes which are much more long-lasting than the strikes are that they propose. But when you do go on strike, you lose any chance of public support because the public doesn't like strikes. Joel gets up and says civil service is an unacceptable comparative because they only provide reports that the politicians don't have to listen to. But note that if the politician wants to get any change done in the future, he has to listen to his civil servants. If you watch Yes Minister, you know you can't do anything without your civil servants. They then say you have the right to strike. There are a hierarchy of rights, and you have to determine which ones are more important. I'm going to suggest to you that the right for people to have vital services to live and survive and to be educated is more important than your right to get paid several £1,000s more a year because you're slightly upset that you have to work 7 more hours. Because at the end of the day, your very existence is dependent on the state and the vital services it offers you. If ever that is put at risk, you are unable to live your life to the same extent that you would otherwise. It literally puts your country back centuries in the way it's able to provide for you because it's no longer able to do all the nice things you want in a nice little democracy. Therefore, this is clearly a brilliant idea because it ensures our livelihoods, it ensures we can act in the way that we want to because we owe our state so much because it's how we survive.
My microphone's on the rest of the trials, and please thank again the proposition summary speakers there, and one final round of applause for all the speakers as a whole who have come down here to address us today. Please thank them. People do. So, we now have to take the final vote of the night and give out our prize. I would like my vote counters to come down again, please, to record one of the things at this stage. After you've heard all our speakers put forward some opinions, after hopefully you've heard new stuff and your views challenged, developed, and possibly altered. Let's see if that has happened. Who in here wants to vote on the motion this House believes that vital public services should not be allowed to go on strike? Who votes for opposition on that? So we've got those numbers down now. Who votes opposition? Who believes that vital public services should be allowed to strike? Okay, looks like those numbers are there too. Now, the third position which you can take, who wants to go abstention? You're undecided, you're in the middle, you don't think you can support one side fully. Who votes abstention on the motion this House believes that vital public services should not be allowed to go on strike? Excellent. I hope everyone has taken something away with the race tonight. And in a few seconds after we've counted up the numbers, we're going to be telling you who won and how views changed. First off, we have this to give. But first off, so I keep you in suspense, I'm going to talk about what we do just for 10 seconds more. Next Monday, we are having another debate. This time it's going to be about the UK's membership of NATO, a hot button issue due to the recent election of Labour leader Corbyn and the possible discussion of that as Labour policy. I remind you as well to come on Thursdays at 7 PM. This Thursday, the 28th, coincidentally my birthday, we are running MACE trials on our basically the English Nationals. And next Thursday, we are running a joint event with SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Science, School of Studies, not science, they haven't made it science. And they're coming over here and we're going to have a social network and training session, so that's very fun. Thursdays at 7. I hope that everyone here can come to them, because it's great fun to learn how to be able to stand up and get opportunities. It's a great skill to have. Right, the winning floor speech. The winner of either this bottle of pork or these bizarrely red milk chocolates. Their choice is Leander, who is up there in the checked shirt. Please come down and accept your chosen award. What's it going to be? Good choice. Dry January, right? And now, the final thing I have to say, the vote. Before you vote everything tonight, when you came into this room, we had 7 people voting in proposition for this motion. We had 10 voting in abstention, and within the day at that point, we had 26 in opposition. After we heard the voice tonight, we had 6 on proposition, we had 6 on abstention, and we had 20 on opposition. So that's how it's been totally, but in terms of changes, proposition lost 1 vote, opposition gained 2 votes, and abstention lost 4 votes. So it seems like we polarized, the room changed around a little, opposition gained a few, proposition lost 1. But I hope that everyone has learned a lot from tonight, and I hope that everyone can come with us to our post-debate social, which happens as always at a bar at TCR to continue the debate in a less formal setting. We have a 10% discount. Follow the red hoodies of the committee, and hoping that we can be there with a couple of speakers and have a great Monday night. Thank you for attending, and I'll see you next Monday or this Tuesday. Thursday.
Thanks, Bailey.